So let me, okay. So what I want to show you guys now is like how to set up your Git. Like if you use like 2-key authentication, if you do something called SSH, which is going to be the default in, I think later this year, if I remember this right. So this is technically more secure than like other ways of doing this. I'm gonna try my best like not to share like something that like someone else can look at and like pretend they're me. So we'll see how this works. But real quick question, has anyone done the SSH key authentication for Git themselves? No. Okay, that's okay. You don't have to know this. So let me pull up, I have a little URL here. Okay, I'm just gonna close this guy. Okay, so the main thing is that the idea here is we talked a little bit about authentication when we talk about APIs, but basically this is a way for you to say, hey, I am who I am. I'm allowed to actually get in to connect to GitHub. So note that this is specific to GitHub because Git, you don't need authentication necessarily because it's on your local computer. But if you want to connect to GitHub, it's basically the way to pass through. You normally do authentication. How do you guys normally do authentication to actually like push stuff into GitHub? To put your username and password, right? So this is kind of, there's a couple ways to do this. So one thing I'll mention, I'm not going to show you guys through it, is that you can do 2-key authentication, or I should say 2-factor authentication. Does anyone know what 2-factor authentication is? Hopefully most people actually know what 2-factor, because see most nods. For the record, if anyone doesn't know what 2-factor is, like one factor can be like your username and password. Another factor is something else, like usually something you have. So like usually like you'll send you a text message on your phone, or you can have an app that has an authentication that you put in a secret code beyond your password. So the idea there is it's a second factor. So just because someone knows your username and password doesn't mean they can get into it. So at this level, you probably don't have to worry too much. So I suggest everyone should do this kind of stuff. But when you start doing things more professionally, you probably should do this. And in fact, some companies actually require you to have 2-key authentication in order for you to, push into their code base and stuff like that. So, which is probably the good thing. And like, for the record, if someone doesn't require you to do that, I still think you should do it. So just know that kind of this exists. One big difference is that instead of using a password, you now use an authentication token. So your authentication token is like a password specific to saying that your computer is allowed to write to GitHub. So it's kind of like a password, but it's a password that's just given to you essentially. Okay. And the reason why that's important is because now you can revoke those tokens. Honestly, usually those are a lot harder to remember. I personally suggest, like I personally use like a password manager and stuff like that. Like, but I know a lot of people also don't like that idea sometimes. So it's just kind of up to you, but that's kind of the easiest way I do stuff. But the next step is actually doing something called SSH. And so the idea with the like here, so basically when you go to clone a repo, so let me just go to like my repo that I have. Oops, did I freeze up? Thought the computer froze for a second. I got a little scared. When you clone this, for example, you can do like, if you notice a clone here, earlier I was just using SSH. You can actually click here, right? And you can see here, there's this URL. This is SSH is what we'll use. This is this has been what most people like I think everyone here is set up, but SSH is actually using something like a password protected key. So the idea here is that there's a key that says you're allowed to actually connect with GitHub. So you can set this up and you can connect with this guy. Also know there's a command line thing. If you have GitHub makes a separate command line tool that's like Git. So just kind of know this exists, but usually you'd use one of these two unless you have the tool installed. So I'm going to kind of more or less kind of walk you guys through like what this looks like. I will tell you that this can feel kind of daunting because there's quite a lot of steps. But if you're like, oh man, like I want to do some stuff, I'm gonna send on the chat. I want to do some stuff, but I don't want to do like any like project stuff, but I want to spend like an hour like setting this up, And I say an hour only because like maybe you have to like look up some stuff and take your time. But this is actually like a 10-minute process. You can do this, but don't feel like you have to rush through it. But I'm kind of walk you guys through a little bit just to show you what this entails. So just know is that this is a way to authenticate. So the first thing you should do, like if you're being proper, is on this like step guide that GitHub has, is you should check that you have like do you have those keys already? Like if you already have those keys, and I'm not going to do this because then this would expose some of my keys. I'm not going to really show you guys that because partly because this is recorded and I don't want people online, anyone who comes across it later on is like, let me see if I can reproduce this. So I'm not going to go through this whole steps. But the main idea here is that maybe one day I'll record something that's like, we'll make it a GitHub account and I'll delete it or something. But main thing here is like, oh, just listings like, hey, do I already have an SSH key already like set? And then if you did, like, oh, cool, easy. But most likely you don't have that. So the step you really have to do is generating an SSH key. So I'm going to close this guy so I don't have to keep opening this up. So the way this works is that you have to use the terminal, right? So in my case, what's really nice is that GitHub actually makes this available for Mac, Windows, and like shows you, like you can see the subtle difference even, like the fact that Windows like Git bash. But what's nice is that it would really try to walk you through trying to make sure this works. And so you just do this step by step, kind of like we did with the curriculum when you first set up Git. The first thing you do is this command right here. I'm going to stick on Mac because I think most people have Macs, or at least not Linux. So Windows is a little bit different. But you can see this guy right here. This command is built in and allows you to create like your SSH key. And so note that this email right here, this is probably the biggest thing. You need to make sure you put the email that you use for GitHub. So you have to go to your profile and make sure that's the verified email that you use. That's how GitHub knows you're the person you say you are. Okay. So just make sure that's a big step. Whenever you see like your email address, make sure, because I've done this myself, is I think I'm using one email, but it's not. So make sure you're using the exact email and how it's listed. Okay. But this will create a SSH key. Now they say that if this doesn't work, you can use this command for like other systems, but you probably all could use this. And this will generate a key, and then it'll prompt you saying like enter a file to save this. You can just press enter and it'll just default to the default one. But you could name specifically if you want to play around with that. And then at this point, they're going to ask you to have enter a phrase, basically a password for your SSH key. This is the one that you want to remember. And I would say make sure you have a decent password. What's a decent password? I would say at minimum 10 characters. Like that's like minimum, like 8 characters, like you shouldn't even be writing a password at that point. So at minimum 10 characters, do something memorable. You guys can look at how to write passwords, I'm sure. I say this because like even really great people do portable passwords, but have a good passphrase, make sure you save this, write it down on a piece of paper, at least at first, figure out how you're going to store this. You don't want to lose that because otherwise you got to do this whole process again. Okay. It's like, okay, cool. Like once you have that, you actually have this generated, and you can see here is that just kind of, okay, we're going to add this SSH key. So you have this key generated to this SSH agent, which is basically the thing that's going to check your key or like check for your key. So just gonna go through the steps, and you'll see that you can open to see if it actually does exist. If it doesn't exist, that's where that touch is. Basically creates this file, and basically this is just saying, hey, this key actually exists, and now you can like use this key. Okay, so that's kind of what's going on here. So like once you have that, your computer now has a special key that you don't have to memorize every single time, but it's specific to your computer and to saying basically like, oh, what the purpose of this key is for. And so now you just say, okay, now I need to connect this to your GitHub account. So that way GitHub knows the key that you're using is in fact you. Does that make sense to people? Okay. So again, this is already seeing like go back to week 1, right? When you guys are setting up GitHub. That's probably what this sounds like. But to add it, it's not that hard. The main thing is basically you want to copy, like you can see on Mac, there's actually a command line tool. I think Windows may even have something similar. Yeah, Linux has something. Linux has to do add install extra stuff. But basically what this command does, it copies it to your like clipboard, which is like when you do copy and paste. So that way you can just paste this directly. And so now you go to GitHub, you actually go into the settings, right? You're going to click on SSH and GGP keys, which you're not going to do GPG. That's a different thing, but I'm going to show you guys just, I don't think it's going to expose anything I'm not supposed to. If not, I'll blur it out, I guess, on the recording. But settings, you would go, I'm not going to click on it because I know it will expose, but like SSH and GGP keys, this is what you'd click right here. So you'd click on this, And from there, it'll show you a little thing that says, it says SSH keys, which should be blank at this point. You'll add a new SSH key. So you click on that, you can name it something. You can say like, my laptop or whatever you want to call it, just so you know what that key is for. And then you're just going to paste it, like whatever was on your clipboard from that very first command. Okay. And you'll see like this long extra stuff of just like information. And then all you gotta do is click add key, and then you might have to put in your password, and that's it. Like now it knows, GitHub knows that your key from your computer is associated with your GitHub account. And now you can just connect to that way. And what's nice is that you actually, once you do this, you don't actually have to like keep putting your password every single time, which is why if you notice, if I do git push to my own account, I don't have to put my password in every single time because I have this SSH connected, which makes it really convenient. The next few steps are like things like testing it out. So you can test out to make sure. And basically this is just saying, hey, can I connect to GitHub? And GitHub says, yes, you are authenticated, but there's nothing important here. So it's just to test things out. One thing to note is that you can also secure your SSH keys and authentication agent and stuff like this. So that way you don't have to keep like putting in a password. Like you still have to put in your password, like passphrase once for the SSH key, but you can have it just store it. And on Mac and Windows, it's really easy. You can see in Linux here, and it's not there because you gotta do some extra funky stuff. But for Mac and Windows, it's not that hard to actually do that. It actually, when you do it for Mac, it actually stores it on your keychain. Everyone knows what your MacBook keychain is, where you store passwords and stuff like that. So it's pretty secure and stuff like that, and you can just put that in there. Windows, it's been a while since I've done Windows. I think you can do something similar. So yeah, in this case, you have to load it into Windows, but I think Mac's a lot easier. I think Mac actually, you don't have to do all that. So yeah, but I would say if you start with the article or the documentation right here and followed it through, it should be pretty straightforward. It's just a lot of steps. But if you try doing this and you have some issues, like definitely ping me and stuff like that. Because sometimes you can get in these weird situations like, wait, how does this work? And at worst is like you just mess it up and like you just make a new key. But this is kind of convenient because now you don't have to put in your password and stuff like this. And if I remember this right, looking at the documentation, eventually this will be the only way to connect to GitHub. You won't be allowed to use your SSH key. The good news is that I don't think that happens until after you're done with the course. So you can kind of keep doing what you have right now, but I think it's something like whenever I set up a new computer, I always just generate new SSH keys so I can connect to GitHub. So it's a good practice to do. Okay. Any questions? I know I didn't literally show you, and I literally just like walk through the documentation more or less, but hopefully you can see a little bit of like the steps. It's not too difficult. It can seem really intimidating, but it's not too bad. Maybe one day when I have some time, maybe I'll record, I'll make a new GitHub account and I'll delete it afterwards. And I'll show you what this looks like. That way I don't have to risk about exposing my own SSH keys and stuff like that. So someone can pretend to be me or connect to my GitHub without my permission.
Yeah. You can have multiple SSH key per computer in your GitHub account, right?
Yeah, you can. Though at that point, I don't know really why you would if you have like multiple SSH keys for GitHub for one computer.
Let's say you have a PC and you have a laptop and
yeah. Oh yeah, you can have it like an SSH key for each computer, and that's how you should do it too. You should have a new key for this computer, a new key for this computer, a new key for this computer. And what's nice about that is that you then know, like if for some reason your account gets hacked or someone tries to be you or your computer gets stolen, you know which computer is that you can revoke that specific one versus changing your whole password and stuff like that. So it does make it a little bit more secure, which is why they're kind of pushing people to move towards this direction. Yeah, makes sense. And what's nice is that this keeps it separate from like your GitHub account, like logging online with like your username and password, and keeping it separate for how you write code, which when you think about it, like you might not want those associated with each other. Like I might just go to my profile, like GitHub, and just like mess around, like look at what's going on. But like if I'm writing something that's really important, I wouldn't want using that same credentials to log myself in to also like authenticate saying, oh yeah, this code is really important. So I'm going to write it, to a company database. So that's kind of the reasoning behind this. Okay. Sound pretty good? All right, cool. I'll stop recording here then.